Hello, this is the Blast Report podcast on all things blasting. My name is Evan Tebow with New Wave Consulting, and I want to thank all the drill and blast teams along with those supporting them who are out there on the pattern. The production team at Blast Think and I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Blast Report podcast. This episode of the Blast Report podcast is brought to you by WipWare. Since 1986, WipWare Photoanalysis Systems has provided solutions for fragmentation optimization. WipWare is a global company with influence in any industry where fragmentation is key to success. They not only measure and monitor materials, they create actionable data. Your mine-to-mill process can be optimized with their available hardware or software options. Whether you use drones for blast photos or you install one of their industry-leading real-time cameras along the haulage process, WipWare creates solid analysis to confirm your blast design is the most effective it can be. This small business has a big impact because you can't manage what you can't measure. Welcome to the Blast Report podcast, everyone. Today, our guest is Jack Eloranta. How you doing, Jack?
Excellent.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, Evan, you do so much for ISEE. How many years since?
I think I was just a student. Started in 2008, and I've just been trying to be as involved as I could. You guys did so much for me with scholarships and mentorship, so I'm happy to be part of it.
So anything I can do, I've been so blessed with, I just had a charmed career, and I owe it all to the people who helped me along. So anything I can do is just all the better.
Well, that's probably a good way to start. For our listeners who might not know you, Jack, and your your time and involvement at the ISEE to become the president around 2016. What was kind of the start of your career, and then if you keep mentioning some of your mentors and those people who did things for you to get you to where you are. But what was it that first got you in the industry? Is it where you're from and it happened to be a job, or was it some weird story?
Well, I started out as a physics major, but I wasn't very disciplined as a student and floundered around, but I found geology to be interesting and got a degree in geology, but it was a downturn and there's no work.
I feel like a lot of people who started out in physics ended up doing something far more interesting.
Oh yes. And my hat's off to the students, who do a good job on that, but I wasn't, maybe if I had grown up a little bit first, then I would have done better. But anyway, I had a campus job, and I'd walk by the mining engineering building every day, and forever I said, I got to stop in there and talk. And one day, the hand of God or something pushed me and turned me, and I walked in and I met Bob Hines. And Bob Hines, it was late in the afternoon. He sat down with a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and he says, "Well, I see you've got a degree. You've got this. Let's see." And in an hour's time, he says, "Okay, this is what you need for a mining degree." And 3 semesters later, I had a degree in mining, and I had job offers all over the place. And of course, the economy had turned, but what a lucky thing to run into Bob.
So is it, what was that calling? Was it the fact that, was there any sort of conversation of explosives at that point at the university, or was it just sheer luck? You were into rocks and you said, what's mining all about?
Yeah, there was no real explosives connection there. I had blown up stumps worked with my dad since I was 10 years old on the farm. And when I'd see this stump up at the apogee floating up there before it started its descent, I wondered, how does that work? I was fascinated by it, and I can still picture myself ducking behind the big wheel of the tractor with my dad and him pushing the button. So that was my first, and I suppose that maybe that kind of planted something in my brain. When I was school got interrupted by the military, and I was at Fort Leonard Wood as a combat engineer, and we probably had all of 20 minutes of handling explosives. I suppose maybe it was a day or so, but just a tiny bit of training.
I just heard the other day that civil explosives takes the path of least resistance, and military explosives is supposed to go the path of most resistance.
Yes, and I really didn't get any true exposure there, but I did. I couldn't get a job in school one summer, so I hand dug a well for my sister and her husband when they built a new house, and I did that with dynamite. So I had dabbled with it, but I was working for U.S. Steel for 7 years before my predecessor in blasting. He got itchy feet and said he's leaving, and they looked around and they said, "Jack, would you do it?" And so that was in 1984.
That's when it started.
Yeah, and the reason they asked me is because Tim was part of a project with DuPont, and you're old enough to remember that DuPont walked on water.
Mm-hmm.
They knew, and they had the expertise. Well, L. Andrews, who I had the fortune to meet, was part of a multi-year venture with U.S. Steel to improve blasting, and they had the best minds in the world. And Al would come to Mintac, and they would start talking geology, and so then they'd ask me to, come into the meeting because we got some questions about these different layers, and so that's how I got tapped on the shoulder, and then I moved in there, and I was so lucky because U.S. Steel had such a program of blasting. In 1948, the Texas City disaster, 700 people died when ANFO was invented.
Yep.
Accidentally. Within 2 years, U.S. Steel was putting fuel oil and fertilizer down blast holes. And one of the guys who was doing that, Frank Del Greco, was in charge of the blasting. And he was and I never really got a chance to meet with him, but he was he had a fertile mind, and he was an operations man, but really pushed the ball down the field.
Prior to that ANFO, what was the blasting method at the time? Water? No, I mean, wasn't water drill, was it?
No,
that ANFO was before that, right?
No, those were packaged explosives, and they were, and I'm displaying my ignorance here, but no, they would lower cans of explosive down, and it was, it was quite a long time after black powder, but it was the interim before water gels, before ANFO.
But it was big diameter boreholes back then too.
Yeah, they were probably they were upwards towards a foot in those days.
Whoa!
By the time I got there, it was 15 inch and then 16 inch. But anyway, they had such a history with Del Greco, Andy Slagle, very bright young engineer, pushed things down the field, and then and Tim Larrick, my predecessor, is just meticulous, and he kept so many good notes, and he trialed different things, but my ace in the hole was we got desktop computers.
Oh.
And I started with spreadsheeting and took all of Tim's trials, and when you can start doing basic statistics and when you can do charting, I mean, you're doing that, boom, just like that. And it was just an explosion in data management there. And I was able to couple that with two self-taught Fortran programmers.
Really?
Bob and these two guys that were in the mine office. Bob Anderson was a draftsman. Doug Mim, he was a line attendant in the mill. He had been a high school math teacher and took a better job in the mine. And they saw his talent, and he taught himself Fortran. And those guys, when I went to bigger data sets and stuff that came off of off the process control computers and those. Mm-hmm. I mean, those guys worked so much magic for me. I mean, I didn't really do the work.
Yeah, you owe it to them. They were the brains behind the operation.
Really, really do. And there is something about the upper Midwest and Minnesota and Wisconsin, and that there's quite a pool of talented people who have a history of doing things properly, and with some meticulous care. And I'm not that kind of guy. I kind of like to hit the high point. So when I have somebody to work with who really sweats the details, oh, that's good. They keep me out of trouble.
Very nice. So so this was about what time? So you started at US Steel.
Yeah, I started in, yes.
Took the opportunity when it was presented to enter into the explosives realm.
Yep.
And you focused your entire career absolutely trying to narrow down, perfect, and manage the application of explosives in the taconite iron ore belt of the upper Midwest, right? That's the story?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So that was 1984. It was November 1984 when the head of engineering called me up one day, and he says, "What the hell are you doing being a labor foreman?" Of course, we had just gone through a huge, the early 80s, 90% of the iron and steel industry went bankrupt in the U.S. And my boss, going into that downturn, said, and again, angels, Keith Jansen called me into his office and said, "Jack, you got to get out of engineering. We're going to send you out into operations because engineering is going to get shellacked."
Really?
Yeah. So
it was true.
It was true. Yes. Yes. And so I spent 2 years, valuable years, pushing labor. And, when you're a smart aleck, it's good to be out into the field and to do the very bottom level, at least management work.
Right, and then it gave you a more a less technical view of what was actually going on in the field, right?
Exactly.
More holistic aspect of what when you're looking at what you think is your powder column, and then what the variables are actually like once you get out there in a borehole that size.
Exactly. And the other part is just in office politics. For a young guy who's got lots of ideas in engineering and wants to change the world, you have to fight a lot of battles in the office politics about should we do it this way or should we do it this way, and it comes down to who can convince the mine manager which is the route, and if the other guy can say, Chuck, you've never been out there on midnight shift. You haven't been there when the power's out and the water's coming up in the sump and you've got all this and you're shorthanded. Yeah, you got great ideas, but they don't fit the real world. And whether it's true or not, those guys really get the upper hand in the argument if you haven't paid your dues out there. So it really helps.
That's a good point that you make there, and that's a very good point. It's kind of paying your dues to make sure that they don't trick you with a question, and that question was designed to see if you really knew what you were doing in the field or if you're just there in the office crunching numbers.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, everybody knows what log rolling is. You try to stay on and get the other guy into the water.
That's right. So, okay. Now you did the 2 years in the field, kind of got your feet wet, let's say, or your hands dirty. Your feet were already wet, but now you got your hands dirty.
Yeah, that was after 5 years in engineering before that. So
right, okay.
Yeah, yes, yep.
And you've got your base in the industry already. Like you're going on two different sides. You're understanding the problems a lot more and the operations a lot more. What were some of the early, you said you were crunching data and you had people on your team to be able to take all these equations that were once just files, and now you're looking back at probably years worth of results and to be able to track some actual variables. What were some of the early things in blasting up in that, up in the taconite and that steel blast, that iron blasting? What was some of the things that you were seeing at that time in your career?
Well, to begin with, I didn't know really anything at all. I didn't know about the bulk products. I didn't know about the accessories, the initiation system. I didn't know anything about blast designing. And so that was quite a lot of uphill learning, and I didn't know where to start. And I thought, well, the first thing that I should do is learn about the accessories, because they were kind of a puzzle to me. That back in those days, it was just a 1 pound cast booster on a 25 grain primacord, and then they were just wired into echelons, 5 rows wide, and maybe up to 100 row down each row.
And were there delays between holes in the same row, or is it just straight row by row?
It was row by row, and
nice. Those makes for some good looking videos.
Oh my goodness! And we had that Red Lake low cam that we had just some beautiful. When you have a 1/4 mile long shot coming at you with a good lens on there.
Yeah.
Those are really some beautiful shots.
Oh man.
But what I learned real quickly was that there really wasn't a good design for the blast, because the taconite is a tough rock, but it's very old and it's very it's quite stiff, so it's all the shifting around over the centuries and thousands of years. It's got a lot of joint sets in it. And the other part is it's a sedimentary formation with slippery sedimentation plains, depositional plains.
Is that because it was under the glacier? Is that Is that why it was like that, or what?
Oh, the glacier is just such a recent phenomenon. It hardly
okay.
plays into the picture because these are in the 2 billion year old range.
Okay.
And the Gunflint range just up 100 miles from us was known to be the oldest exposure of rock on the globe until further in South Africa and in Australia. But so extremely old rock, very hard. But here was the problem. It had all these joint sets, and the sedimentation plains had a lot of phyllite, chlorite, and slippery, like talcum powder minerals in it. And it would slide on those pretty easily.
Interesting.
And so what the problem was, you'd shoot, and especially where the planes daylighted, going down the pattern, the bedding planes daylight, that piece would slide, and it would cut off the cord of the ensuing holes. So they had to shoot it fast. 17 milliseconds between echelons going down the pattern.
And they're 15-inch diameter or 16-inch diameter holes?
Yeah, and they weren't 16 in those days, but there probably was a few, but there certainly were 15.
Still, that is fast. That's not bad.
Very fast. And then when the pattern was out at 30 feet by 30 feet, those blasts went down the row at a supersonic rate. I mean, the sound only moved away at 1 foot per millisecond, right? 1,000 feet per second. But the blast would go 30 feet in 17 milliseconds. So it was over the sonic velocity, which meant that then you had a beam off each side, that the sound from all the holes would arrive at a point at the same time. It just like is exactly the same as a sonic boom with a jet engine. And that's really one of the problems. That's why DuPont was involved. How are you going to get out of that? Because if you slow it down, your hole's going to cut off, because there's enough time for that wedge of material to slide and cut off the ensuing holes. So you got to shoot it fast. So there was cutoffs, and then there was found powder.
Wow,
couple times a week.
And that has to be very dangerous, because it's not just, if you're getting cut off powder and you also have det cord in the powder column. Were there situations where shovels were initiating this misfired product?
Well, I've got a story on that, but for right now, that really wasn't so much of a problem, because the 1 pound cast booster and that 25 grain cord was fairly insensitive relative to having a downhole delay, which hadn't been invented yet.
Touche. I see what you're saying. Right. Yes. And it was TNT boosters. They were right. Perfect.
Yes. Yeah. They'd be Penelite or TNT. So you're screwed either way. You're either too fast or you're too slow, and then when you're then we're always tying in the shovel runners find powder in the bottom of the hole that got cut off, and then the blasters are lying on their belly with a coffee can, scooping out as much powder as they can, and reaching down and finding and of course we had two a backup as well, 2 cords and 2 1-pounders, and reach those and tie them, and then next time you blast in that area, then you'd tie it in with the blast.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was working, the period while I was working in the field, in operations, everybody was called on blast day to block off a road. You're part of the clearing procedure.
Right.
And so I was clearing me, and the blast went off, and it was one near the rim of the pit, near the dry house. And I got back, and my desk and the coffee machine that sat on it and everything, there was a 140-pound granite boulder that had come through the window.
Get out of here. Whoa.
And that was a result of one of these, not a cutoff hole, but an entire cutoff pattern.
Whoa.
And the troubles of when you have a ramp that you leave in the pit. And you've worked everywhere up and down the bench, left and right, but now you've got this piece of rock with a road on it that now you're going to you're going to move the road, and mine through there. Well, that rock's been tormented from two sides, shaken up, and
so preconditioned.
So it's not very, it's kind of bad ground, and this was on the side of the pit where the bedding planes daylighted. So this notion of things sliding is almost guaranteed, and so the road was removed and the pattern cleaned up, and it was drilled and shot, and the whole top of it got cut off. 40-50 foot bench, and at least 30 feet of that was left. So they came back in and drilled it on the odd pattern, and then there was powder right up to arm's reach. How far can you reach down and take the powder out? Right down to where things got cut off.
Okay, I see what you're saying. All right.
Yeah.
I was thinking because it was a metal mines, there was load her high, let her fly.
Well,
it took a long time to see them and get it out.
Well, they really do. I mean, the powder fractures were used for immense. Now, I have to say that top cutoff area is not that it's really even shot. It's just that it's slid around enough, that it appears to be broken ground, because farther down the dip, the things did go off. Without a diagram, it's hard to explain the whole thing, but suffice it to say that the powder was, the amount of room for stemming was less than 5 feet. So what we did is, as we hauled the tailings, the coarse tailings in the process, it's of course sand. And what they did is they hauled the tailings in there and stacked that up equivalent height, made it 15 feet deep of stemming. Of course, sand is not quite like rock. And unfortunately, when they were loading out of the coarse tailings pile, the loader off the ground scooped up this boulder that got perfectly placed, like a cannonball in a cannon.
Oh, okay, that's what happened.
So that 140-pound granite boulder, there's two guys I worked with were standing at my desk and looking out the window, and the blast went off. And they saw, coming over the power line, they saw the boulder.
Thank God.
It hit the parking lot pavement and bounced through the window. And Perry grabbed Jim and yanked him, and they jumped behind a big I-beam girder, and the rock came crashing through. And when I arrived there, but 3 minutes later, they were both still as white as a ghost. And I was thinking, what are these guys doing? They're foremen. Why are they standing outside without their hard hat and glasses on? Because we're pretty strict about safety gear every time you stepped out. And I was going to walk up and give Perry a hard time about not wearing his safety gear.
Even some grease here.
And his jaw was still on the ground.
Wow. I'm glad they're safe, but yeah, no wonder they were white. So they're standing in your office.
Yes.
Watching this boulder come soaring over. And luckily it bounced once to take some of that force away, but it took out your desk.
Yep.
And you were, what was your title? Please tell me what your title was at that moment.
I was a track foreman. I was in charge of crews laying track.
Okay, because I was wondering if it was going to say like blasting specialist or.
No.
That would have been a little ironic at that point, you know.
No.
But man, that's unbelievable. And so thank goodness you were actually out in your unit.
Yep.
And not at your desk at the time.
Yep.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a good thing those guys were looking out. And
absolutely.
And we had a 4,000 foot clearing radius, 4,000 feet. You know, when you say load them up and let them rip, that's what we do.
Yeah.
But that the dry house is 100 and I don't know, maybe 150 feet elevation higher than the area in the pit, maybe 200 feet higher. So, out of convenience, when the blast clearing map was made, they said rather than to have to move everybody's cars and everything, we'll say that the open face of the blast is the other way. It should go the other way, and it's also the elevation. You're going to get a little less range, you know, with the same ballistics. But that's what happened when they let that be 3,750 feet, I think it was.
Wow, 3,750 feet, and I mean, I would have thought, of course, you're all that's so far away, and to double, you know, we always say if you have a misfire or you're gonna shoot something with less burden, you double your clearance and stuff like that. But you know, when you're already that far away, okay, now you're gonna double your clearance, and you know, okay, well, we'll bury it, and you'd think burying it with that much sand would add enough burden, but this was just right there sitting on top of the sand or mixed in with that sand.
Yeah, it must have been pretty low down in, you know, near the collar of the hole, in with the sand. Yep.
Damn.
Yep.
What a story.
Yep. And I tell that story, you know, getting back to the thread of what I was saying is that you had these cutoffs and you had the supersonic blast, and neither, you really couldn't live with either of them. I had pictures in my file of the other part of that problem is when you're supersonic and when you have winter conditions where it's cold and still, and now the sonic velocity slows down, so it makes your blast relatively faster. So you get a worse effect. And then the other part is air blast focusing. You know, this was about 1976. I suppose a person could do that. That was right before my arrival here. And but it was a very dramatic event. And that's all predated the downhole delays. And people were very much worried about adopting the downhole delays because now you had a sensitive cap down at the bottom of the hole. And we handled so many misfires, you know, so many of these that had to be dug out. It was such a common thing. It was assumed that we'd still have a lot of them, and that you'd end up with shovel digging into and hitting a cap. We had done tests because we had remote control trains, so that the train operator could operate, you know, from on the ground or in the cab or on the tail of it or whatever. And so what we had done is we had put a blasting cap into the primers. And excuse me, now this is with the downhole delays. Before we started using them, we put those inside our 1 pound primer and tape it to the ball of the rail and then run the locomotive over it. And we did that dozens and dozens of times to see could you set that off? And mostly we did that. We knew that they were quite safe, but we wanted to show it to our employees too, that, that when you purposely line up everything just right and you keep on smashing that booster, by the time you smash the booster, the cap no longer has good contact with it.
Really?
Yeah, and that it pops and it pops, but we could never get one to go off.
So,
not the booster. Well, the booster is the whole thing, but
the cap would go. But
the cap would go, but it would.
The interaction between the cap and the booster was not intimate enough to translate the shockwave and heat to initiate the whole system.
Exactly.
Wow. And you would do this with a locomotive?
We did that with a locomotive with nobody on it, and so that, and of course
that's fun.
Oh yeah,
that's fun. You get to put a booster on a railroad track. I mean, I got in trouble for putting pennies in quarters.
Well, this is all our own. We had 80 miles of our own railroad track there in the pit.
Still, whoever you got to convince to do that, that's pretty on you.
And you really couldn't hurt the bottom of the locomotive. Maybe there's some air hoses or something that might possibly have to be replaced. But unfortunately, that didn't prove to be absolutely true, because it was much later, decades later, when I was asked to come in to National Steel Pellet Company, which is the westernmost mine, and they had a cutoff that had been there was a hump in the bottom of the pit, where there's a haul road, and the road always went over this hump, and it was because they had a cutoff a number of years before, but the mapping was poor, and they really didn't put two and two together and say that hump there was because of an old cutoff pattern. And one morning at the start of day shift, the foreman said, we're moving this shovel across the pit, and we got that hump in the road. While we're going by there, let's just dig that hump off there. Just
like
take an hour.
With the dozer, or
with a shovel, with the
shovel. Okay,
with a big shovel, and this is a big rope shovel, and so the shovel runner, this gal ran the bucket into that and set off probably 4 or 5 feet of probably something like a 50-50 Anvil blend mix, with a 2-pound booster in there, and a pair of caps inside of that,
and about a 15-inch diameter, 5 feet of 15-inch diameter.
Yep.
That's not a little about a product. That's a significant.
That's a big bomb that you drop out of a plane.
Yes.
Yeah. So it blew the lip off the shovel. It blew the windows out of the haul trucks and the rubber tired dozer, several hundred feet away. That part of that, the part of the shovel was found on top of the crusher, better part of a quarter mile away.
Whoa.
And the shovel runner, she was really fortunate, because the way it was, the boom and the stick of the shovel were in between her and the explosion.
It was on the other side of the bucket.
Yeah. And the stick and the boom on on the shovel. She didn't come away unscathed, however, because she ended up inner ear damage, and she had vertigo. Fortunately, after a month or two, that abated. But the shock, her semicircular canal in her ear were so shocked, that your level bubble in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, That's best case scenario for a situation like that.
Yeah. And so I was called in to set up procedures, and it was I think this is long enough ago that I'm not really dissing anybody who is involved in it, but I brought in to set up procedures to avoid having that happen again. And I came up with a number of things that they really needed to do. And somehow they said, no, it's going to take too many people to do it, and they didn't institute the changes. And so it was
Isn't that crazy how that happens sometimes?
Yeah.
There's an incident, and you say, okay, well, this is what really needs to be done. And then somebody says, we can't afford that, or that's too much change. And, well, what did you hire me for? What's the point here? So what were some of those recommendations? I think probably one that would be very crucial on that is knowing where the toe and the collar of your hole is from the bench above to the bench below, and to be designing your pattern offset of that. And now that's pretty much standard procedure in almost every metal mine, and I think that's a law in Canada, and applicable throughout almost most quarries in the U.S. Right? Was that one of them? What was something else that you suggested?
Well, there were some rather egregious shortcomings. They'd use a side tilt bucket to put the stemming in, and the stemming was excellent stemming. It really held, but it was railroad ballast. It was fist size, and it's very sharp, angular taconite.
Okay.
And they had nobody on the ground. They just have the loader operator dumping into the holes.
Oh, I see.
And so those cords are going down, and actually these are in cords. These were plastic downline. They would get hit by that, and so they get damaged. And then sometimes they would tie them off. They used a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, about 3 foot by 3 foot square of plywood, and they put that over as a safety cover, because these holes were big enough that you would fall into them.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you, when it was 16 inches, were you wearing fall protection at that point?
And
did you up in Suncor?
Yeah. The problem is that the top of that hole becomes fluted, and because it's the blast from the bench above damages the top of the new bench, and so when you start a drill hole, you don't get every now and then you get a nice clean hole, like drilling a piece of steel,
if you're lucky.
But more often you get that funnel shape, and even if you couldn't fall down the hole, if you walk and step into that, especially, it does snow sometimes here. Like we got 8 inches of snow yesterday here, and so you're working on a slippery surface, and the wind blows and it's drifted across. You don't even know where the holes in, and they might be a lot of the lower benches will be full of water. There'll be a layer of ice. You walk out, and then you break through the ice. No, you can be in bad shape in a hurry. So anyway, they had these 3 foot by 3 foot squares of 1/2-inch plywood that were the hole cover, and then they had a hole through that enough so they could tie their downlines to that. But
so there would be a hole drilled in to the plywood so that you could load through it and put the downlines, or this was installed after you loaded the hole?
No, the hole covers, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on it, but I'm sure I got the general gist of it right. The hole covers had to be placed as soon as it was drilled. That was MSHA requirement. And then there was the hole cover was set aside while you're loading.
Okay. Okay.
But there's a little hole to tie the those downlines to. But when you're tying that plastic tubing in cold weather and what, they get lost. They fall down the hole, and then what do you do to get them? Sometimes they're just lost.
Yeah, and if there's one still tied in, then you tie that one in.
Yeah.
I worked in the Iron Belt in Canada, and it was, you're giving me flashbacks of some of the situations that I had. I mean, I'm a small guy, I would damn near fall in a borehole, especially if it was a redrill. If you're walking down the pattern and you think you don't know there's a hole there, it's been re-drilled. So you're thinking you're walking where there's no holes, but there's a redrill that's not in the regular row. And that's the one that's covered with snowdrift. That's nice and flat. And then next thing you know, you're like holding on for dear life, thinking you're about to fall into the abyss, but it's just the collar of the hole from before. And I see what you're saying. Like, if you have one or two down lines tied off to the side and you don't have the side tilt bucket, or you have the side tilt bucket and no one's holding the down lines, or at least took them and walked away to hold them, even if they're holding them. I mean, I was holding one of those down lines once when the stemming size, you're right, it just cut the line and you just feel it go loose and you're like, oh, that's not good. We were using heavy duty electronic, but it was the same thing was still happening in those situations. I mean, damn near one time we had the side tilt bucket worn out the pins because you have to tilt it so many times, wiggling the cuttings the stemming. The stemming's full of snow or it's frozen together and you're wiggling it out to get to, and next thing you know, the pin gets loose. The whole bucket dang near fell and ran us over next to the borehole. I mean, thankfully the bucket didn't hit the down line and cause an initiation or anything, but it's absolutely one of those situations that can cause a misfire at the bottom of the hole if you lose both of those down lines. And it's so far down there, you can't really go fishing for it. I mean, you can try to, but the luck of that is very difficult, No,
very difficult. No, this. The sea very well from being in Labrador.
Too well, but so you're saying that one of those, and unfortunately we had an incident very similar to that with det cord in Western Canada, where the shovel operator dug into a misfired product. We don't know how many feet of the borehole it was, and the loader tooth of that shovel, it was a very large rope shovel as well, and it went flying. I don't remember how many yards, but it went flying. And also they had hearing damage, so and it was on the other side of the bucket. So that's a best case scenario for an operator to just have the ear damage, and some vertigo. Like, they are very, very lucky. And it's amazing that has happened at your facility, and also one that I was working at too. I mean, it's with that amount of force.
Absolutely. And it was even more, the story is actually worse. And now as I tell it to you, and I've been party to this, when the shovel starts running out of digging and the crusher needs ore, then the word goes out, well, go and clean up along that bank. You get a little more over here. Well, what shovel runners do, and especially at night, is they'll scrape the wall. And here, they had overdug. And of course you get back wall damage. You get back wall damage, and you get it. So the top half of the bench falls down, and they produce that. I mean, I was in charge of.
Let me understand this real quick.
Yes.
They overdug not into the final pit wall. They overdug into the following pattern that had been loaded.
Yeah, it's loaded.
Okay, continue. Sorry. Yeah. Wow.
So I was, for a very short time, I was in a shift foreman for truck production, and I got there for a midnight shift, and they said, "Oh, well, you go over and have the 17 shovel dig, and see if we can find some more ore along this bank over here. There's no place to dig." I went over there, and the blast was loaded, and then they'd put multicolored flagging along that crest. And of course, at the start of the shift, you get out there and you get your crews going and you do all this stuff. And I think we had hot relief in those times. So somebody got off the shovel and got on and they're working away. And so with a 10-mile long operation, it could have been an hour later before I got over there to check to see, what's going on here. Because I thought we had dug that shovel out the day before. We said this one's dug out. There's no more ore here. And I said, well, how can we be digging there? I get over there and here the shovel is digging the flagging out, from the edge of the pattern. And that's what they
see it hanging down. You could.
Oh yes, exactly. And that's what they had done at this incident that I'm just describing. And they had at least a half a dozen holes that had been, the tops have been, material is gone. So if you walk to the crest up on the pattern, you look over the edge and there's a steep slope and no sign of the holes. And then, halfway down the bench, and then is the wall. And that's all you could see. So they saw some cords, some downlines, but they said, well, we better not shoot that Trent row. And we can add that as a buffer. And they were worried because that faced the crusher. And
that's why they decided not to shoot it with less burden, because they didn't want to hit the crusher.
Yeah, so they just let those holes. They just, at least a half a dozen of them were there that were just pushed out and left behind. And then it was probably 5 years later, and they had lost track of that spot. So it was not something that what happened is what you'd expect to happen if you do that.
Yes. Yeah, that was a very obvious situation. What were some other things that you can remember that? So it was over digging of the original face.
Yes.
Not knowing where the holes were.
Yep.
Where you actually loaded them.
Poor
mapping of the floor. So the fact that somebody thought it was a good idea years later to say, "Oh, go clean up that hump and that hard toe," because you're walking across, and not.
Yep.
By the way, that hard toe there, or the monument, we always called it a monument.
Yeah, the monument.
That monument's
exactly.
there because if somebody's name is written on that monument.
Yeah,
Who was it that made that mistake?
Evans Monument.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So were there any other things that you can remember that maybe you tried to implement that was rejected in that situation? I'm trying to think of some that I would think of on that. Did you have any sort of lights that you could put at night? Because it kind of sounds like that was a late shift that overdug because they couldn't see the flags themselves. I think that's something that we added. There was a certain color light that was different than all the other lights, so they knew where the pattern was.
Yep. And I remember John Floyd when. Of course, at night, it's hard to see them, but instead of staking out the dig limit there with one stake, he would put up two stakes with flagging on it. And the shovel runner's instructions were to dig and make the first stake flag fall, but keep the second one standing. That way,
That's a good idea.
You dug enough, but not too much.
That's a good idea. Wonderful. Okay, so that's a good story, Jack. Thank you for using that as an example and remembering that one. That's definitely one of those ones that is far too common in history in these big mines.
Well, the fact that you've had experience, on both ends of that, you know exactly what you mean. So so. It's not a one in a million occurrence.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blast Report podcast. I want to thank the team at Blast Think for producing this show, and please follow along for more episodes in the future, and share this podcast with your colleagues so we can continue to honor our industry and the people in it. Be safe and have a blast.